Welcome to SportsLit and a conversation with Randy Mills about his book, As If by Magic, the story of Larry Bird's Indiana high school basketball days, published by Blue River Press. I'm Neil Acharya. Larry Bird is one of the greatest basketball players of all time. We know him as Larry Legend, first-round pick who played in the NBA from 1979 to 1992, a 12-time All-Star and a 3-time NBA champion, a forward for the Boston Celtics who retired as number 33 and a member of the original Dream Team. Larry Legend also has another nickname, the Hick from French Lick. Larry Bird grew up poor in rural Indiana, a product of the environment in which the movie Hoosiers came from. Hoosiers was released in 1986. Hoosiers is a fictionalized account of an underdog Indiana high school basketball team on their way to winning the state championship in the 1950s. What was going on in Indiana that would allow Hollywood to come calling? Randy Mills explores this world of drugstore coaches and barbershop experts, a time when a high school team could represent a community all the way from kids to senior citizens. He presents this world, the world in which Larry Bird emerged from as a shy kid who grew up tall and grew up fast, initially cast in the shadow of his older brother Mark. It's not a fill in the blanks as much as it's a fill in around the edges. It includes the high school stars at the time who overshadowed Larry, those who played with him and those who played against him, and the men that coached him. How much you appreciate this book depends on how much of an interest you have in Larry Bird himself. How much you draw from it depends on how invested you are in learning about Hoosiers, the residents of Indiana, the rabid basketball fans that created the atmosphere for their sporting culture to be romanticized in film. Mills is an author and a retired social science professor from Oakland City University in Oakland City, Indiana. He was a former Illinois high school player in the 1960s. He seeks to mine Larry's roots and extrapolate. Why such a vested interest to go so niche? Because he lived basketball as it were in the Midwest. It's not like that anymore. It probably hasn't been for a long time. It can't be. Things evolve, but there are remnants. The Indiana Pacers play in the Gainbridge Fieldhouse, a stadium that was designed with heritage in mind. Before it broke ground in 1997, the intent was to create a retro building that reflected the typical high school field houses of Indiana, a state where basketball was at the center of town life and townsfolk lived and died with the fortunes of their high school teams. Let's speak with Randy Mills about this era, about this time and onward, and about the world in which Larry Bird grew up in and played high school basketball. Well, we're pleased to have Randy Mills, author of As If by Magic. I know this has been a long time coming. We've been talking about having you on for quite some time. So thank you for playing through on this one with me, Randy.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So I guess my first question is, and this is probably, for a lot of us that have never read any of Larry Bird's biographies or what's been out there already before your book, what's new in this book that you want to point out that others may have not had in their book about Larry and or may not know about Larry?
One of the things that I discovered very quickly, I thought I was just going to write a pretty straightforward book about this guy that came out of nowhere, who knows why, and there he was, as if by magic. And then by the time I got into it deeply, I saw that the magic was an issue. And part of that reason of not knowing how Larry got there had to do with the poverty of his family. The county that he grew up in was the poorest county in the state. The family that he lived with was the poorest family in a poor town. His father was an alcoholic. He did work when he wasn't drinking. His mother held down 2 or 3 jobs. He had a grandmother that was very steadfast there. And so when Larry became famous and people started coming into French Lick to find out more about him, to write about his story, he shut all that down. He told everyone, he said, I don't want anybody to know about my dad or my family or my early days. So there were a few stories out there that had been told, that got told and retold, none of them which are completely accurate. So I went in many years later and looked through old newspapers, which suddenly I had access to, that wasn't accessible until here fairly recently, and went back and re-talked to some of the people. I ran into what I call the Larry Bird Mafia, who had told, remembered Larry said, don't tell anybody about this stuff. And by the time I came along, hey, they're all going to be in the book. I said, I'm writing about you guys and how you helped Larry. I didn't do it by himself. And I think only one guy was steadfast with, well, I don't want Larry mad at me. In fact, he thanked me for putting him in the book. He still wouldn't talk to me, which was fine because I was finding plenty of things by that time. So I think the thing that really stood out to me was this whole idea it was magic, and then realizing as I dug into it that there were all these people and events that if they had not happened, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about Larry Bird. I really believe that there were key people, there were key turns of events, some of it just dumb luck that made all of that happen. So that's really what the book's about. The basketball games are about his opponents and the coaches he went up against. All those things made him better. It was not by magic. If I can read something about that from my book, I speak to that. As much as sports historians and basketball fans might wish to believe that a kind of magic caused Larry Bird to emerge from being just a solid high school basketball player in his junior year into an unbelievable superstar by his senior year, they might be wrong in doing so. Magic suggests the instant, the supernatural, the unearned, leaving out aspects of hard work, dedication, and sometimes just plain luck that operates in real life. Thus, using magic to explain Larry Bird's extraordinary high school senior year excludes the more complex elements of detailed history, of key people, and of events that, if absent, would likely have left Larry Bird living in rural Orange County today. Perhaps the most significant aspect that created a sense of the supernatural was simple. No one saw Larry's greatness coming, not even Larry Bird, after Larry Bird's solid year. I mean, it just came out of nowhere. And let me give you a prime example of how that worked. And let me introduce another thing that just permeates the book, and I'm doing now. I think I told you I was working on about how Larry got to Indiana State. So many people, when they talk about Larry Bird, project Larry's eventual greatness back on the time they're talking about. I'm going to give you some really good examples of even Larry doing it. But let me give you one about how Jim Jones does that. That was his coach in high school in Biddy ball that Larry said taught him all the fundamentals he ever needed. So this was an important man in Larry's life. And also, I'm bringing up that thing of he didn't have a father there that was dependable. So he was very big on having these very strong males in his life. And Jim Jones was probably the first one that came along and really made a difference. He coached Larry's sophomore and junior year. So Larry, if Jim Jones had known what was going to happen to Larry, he wouldn't have done what I'm going to tell you he did. Larry had a really good junior year. He was about 6'3". He wasn't the best player on the team by far. I speak about this in the book about the kind of the lost Blackhawk, Steve Land, who set all the records. And all that gets forgotten in doing that projection back on Larry. So Jim Jones, after Larry's junior year, he'll say today, boy, he was just great. He was just extraordinary. Jim Jones didn't coach him the next year. He quit coaching.
Right.
He wasn't there for the ride. Now, if you knew you were going to have the greatest basketball player in Indiana high school history, you would not have quit. And in fact, the guy that followed him, Gary
Holland.
Holland told me a story. He said when Jim announced he quit, we were just shocked. And he said he walked up to me and whispered in my ear. He put his hand on my chest and whispered in my ear, "They're all yours," because Larry and the Carnes brothers or cousins were kind of a rough bunch, and Jim was a very straight shooter. I will say this for Jim. I like to think of Jim as putting Larry in the birdcage of discipline and making him learn these things and saying, Larry always said that I never quit. I couldn't quit practicing because Jim Jones always said, there's somebody out there shooting another jump shot. There's somebody out there doing another lap around the gym. And Larry said, that just haunted me. Well, that was Jim Jones's style. So Jim had Larry in this birdcage of discipline, and then Gary Holland the next year opened the cage up. He was just a freewheeling, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that? And in many ways, Larry ended up kind of directing the team. And if you look at the rest of Larry's life with his coaches, he had the same relationship with every one of them. Where if Larry, I remember that they talked about this in the Celtic games. Larry come over there and say to the coach, "Hey, give me the ball. I'll score next. We need to score."
Mm-hmm. I was gonna ask you about both of those coaches and their impact on Larry a little bit later, but because we're talking about it now, you touched on it a little bit, but how do they affect his progress in different ways? I know obviously Coach Holland came on in his senior year. Coach Jones was there earlier, but what did they do to really shape him?
So Jim came to Springs Valley in 1962 and got moved up pretty quickly to head coach. And that time, Jim was famous for being a good disciplined coach. He was no nonsense. You came there and he had these things for you to do, and they were things you needed to be doing. He had a lot of knowledge about basketball and how to build up skills, and also how to get the most out of players. He never shouted, he never screamed, he never humiliated, but he made you knew he was watching, and you respected him, and you wanted to keep his respect. So someone like Larry, who needed a strong father figure, it was a perfect relationship for them. And Jim saw Larry's. Jim talks about seeing, even when Larry was young, he had these skills. He could read the court. He would even playing biddie ball, which would be fifth and sixth grade. He would be reading the court. He would be watching, and he'd be moving around. Nobody else was doing that on defense and on offense because he was seeing 2 and 3 moves ahead. So Jim saw that, but even then, Jim didn't know what this was going to lead to. I mean, it was very pleasing to him. Gary Holland was the assistant coach, and Gary Holland kind of had to do the dirty work. Larry got kicked off the team his 8th grade year. He had a bad temper. He was probably working through some stuff with his dad. I think they moved for the eighth or ninth time that year. And he was talking back the referees and slamming the ball down, those kinds of things. So he got kicked off the team, and then Jim sent Gary to talk to the mom. He said, tell her, get Larry back playing again, but he's going to have to follow the rules. Mm. And Gary told her that he needed to be playing basketball, that it could be a ticket for his, get a college education. And also he's going to be maybe one of the best basketball players that ever played there at Springs Valley. Oddly enough, he told me, he said, I didn't believe that. I just wanted to get into play. But as it turned out that way. So that was Gary Jim in the beginning. Players would tell me that Jim would see, you weren't supposed to be messing with the players and watching during the summer. That was not legal according to state rules. He would come, and if they were playing out of doors, wherever they were at, he'd come by and suggest some things from the work on, and then he'd come by again and again and again and again to make sure that they were doing it. So they knew to be doing it. And Larry was probably the best one to do that. If you read the book, you remember the story of Tony Clark going by there, and it was raining, and there was Larry Bird shooting baskets, and his hair was all matted down wet and so forth. So Larry ate that up. And then, of course, again, when Gary came along, very easygoing, quiet guy. I remember a story after Larry left that next year. They had some trouble with several of the players, and so they had been caught at this thing they weren't supposed to be doing, and the other players were happy. They thought these guys need to be kicked off the team, and Gary came in and said, "Okay, you guys quit doing that," and then away he went. But that was kind of his way of addressing things.
Do you think that basketball was, the entry point to basketball was the escape for Larry from his home life? Is that what drew him to the sport initially, or does that tie deeper into? This book is as much about the state as it is about Larry, right? So I'm just trying to think of how he came to basketball to begin with, and if it was an escape given his turbulent home life.
Well, yes, it was, and it was for many of us that had issues. One of my reasons, so I'm academically primarily a military historian, and after writing several books, when I interviewed common everyday soldiers in unusual, harsh combat circumstances, I was getting depressed, and so I decided to do something else, and I ended up writing a memoir about my own basketball days, and that ended up. Here's a picture of it.
Yeah.
That ended up getting quite a few hits on Facebook, like thousands, and a couple of NBA players. And what I came across was the understanding of the 60s and 70s was a golden age in the Midwest, maybe in the country, of high school basketball. Single class basketball, a lot of small towns still existed. So many small towns aren't there anymore in many ways. It's Walmarts and interstates and so forth.
Right.
So this was a story not only of Larry, but I would say of myself. When I wrote this book, it ended up being about me and my dad and depression, and how playing basketball made me feel good about myself. And it was a initiation into young manhood. So I would say, especially for Larry, it was maybe a matter, I wouldn't say of life and death, but certainly much more at stake for him. But yes, basketball was the thing that he thought about it. He said he thought about it all the time when he was in the classroom. He imagined what he needed to be working on, what he needed to be doing.
How and why do you feel Bird's performance was connected to what was going on around him in Indiana? He's growing up in the 60s, and he's going to high school in the early 70s. I think right off the top in the first part of the book, you do kind of, there is next, you said it earlier, like it didn't come out of nowhere. So, tell me what's going on in Indiana basketball and Larry's connection to this.
Well, you've seen the movie Hoosiers, perhaps?
We're going to have a Hoosiers question a little bit later, yes.
Okay. Well, I played basketball in Southern Illinois, the Midwest, Ohio, all big basketball states in high school. But Indiana is a notch above. And I've done some research and writing about that. But I think in Indiana, the small towns, the strong communities, the lack of a state that had a big city like Chicago, for example, that maybe split up the state a little bit. Indianapolis is right there in the middle. It's considered the most southern and rural of all the Midwestern states. So basketball, the camaraderie of it, the emphasis on egalitarianism and the underdog, those are all a part of the stories, the great story in Indiana basketball history. James Naismith, when he came to Indiana in 1926 and came to the state tournament and watched every game, they gave him a little bench down in the corner. It was played in the exhibition hall there at the Indianapolis, where the state fair was. And he watched all the games. And he said later, I've never seen anything like it. He said, basketball is not being played any other place in the country or in the world like it is here. It's fast, it's there's precision. He called it machine-like. The love of the underdog, all of those things, which is kind of classic Hoosierism, I guess. But the other interesting thing about Larry, so people that came from Indiana grew up with those legends. They grew up with the Wonder Five there from Franklin in the 1920s, which is the first big basketball team, and then all the great rivalries, and of course the 1954 Milan championship. Such a funny story there, and I kind of underplay it in the book to get to my punchline. But there was a guy that came to Larry Bird's school where he would go in the 1950s. And he was from Butler, and he played control basketball, slow down basketball, hold the ball, stall ball, they called it. And the people hated it because French Lick and West Baden, which are right beside each other, they were rivals. And they hated it. They wanted that fast Hoosier basketball. Well, you're going to get 2 years as a coach. Whatever you do your first year, they'll fire you after second if you don't do better. So he had a so-so season his first year, but the second year, the players started figuring it out. Where I taught in high school in the 70s, they had a famous coach who did stall basketball. And he was incredible, and his winning records were incredible, but it was so disciplined and it was so interesting to watch. It was a thinking game. And so by the second year, getting back to 1950s, early 1950s, this coach was winning games. And finally the sports writer there in town got on his bandwagon. He said, hey, we're going to go deep in the tournament. This guy's really good. Well, they lost the last game of the sectional, which is the first round of the state tournament. And I talked to one of the players. I saw him when I was doing the book signing that played there in the 50s. And he said there were 6 people that ran the town that had him up against the wall and said he was fired. And they got rid of him. Well, he went on to another school. He went to Milan. And the next 2 years later, he won the famous basketball game that Hoosiers came from. So they ran him out of French Lick. And he goes there and he becomes famous. And that story becomes famous. But that's the story of egalitarianism and the underdog, the story of Milan, though Milan wasn't as small as some schools, but that's what it becomes famous for. So those are the traditions that are floating around. Oscar Robertson then later on in the mid-50s. So a lot of great teams, but here's the kicker. Larry Bird's not paying any attention to that. He says in his biography, he said, I didn't go. He said he didn't go to a basketball game, a varsity basketball game, until he was a freshman because he was nervous and he wasn't interested. Until he was a sophomore, he wasn't interested at all. That was one of the other things I was going to read, but I decided on this thing. So the question becomes, what was that moment of clicking?
Right.
And that moment of clicking happened in his freshman year when his brother was a senior and they won the sectional in 2 overtimes, and his brother was the hero of both games. He ended up getting a scholarship to a little college, which was a big deal to him. It was a little college I went to too. In fact, I went to college with Larry Bird's brother. That's where I met Larry Bird. He was a 26'1" guy that would look down at the floor when you'd look at him. But Mark Bird.
Is that Oakland?
Yeah, Oakland City College.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So you had that going on, and Larry said in his autobiography he was so moved to tears. He was sobbing, and he said, "Why am I sobbing?" And later he said, "I realized I want that. I want to be that hero." And he was around Mark, and Mark was a hero, and now this poor family. Now Mark's getting attention, and he's in the newspapers, and he does well at Oakland City, and so Larry got the first taste of that. And then there was his sophomore year. He started junior varsity. He broke his ankle, so he didn't play at all. So now he's getting frustrated, and the coach lets him dress for sectional. That's the first stage of the state tournament in Indiana. If Larry's able to run what they call killer sprints, well, he's able to meet that time, but he's in a lot of pain. So he dresses. So Larry said this is the second big experience in his life that changed his life that he's put into that game. And what happens to him changes his life. Now, I got to bring up another angle that I see in this book a lot, and I talked about it earlier. Larry, like everybody else, projects his future greatness on his past. When he tells that story, and I would like, if I may, well, I can tell it, I almost know it by memory. But Larry says in the book Drive, he says, I'm sitting there, and I've never played in a varsity game, and I hear somebody calling my name. Who the hell's calling my name? Well, it's the coach. He's putting him in. So Larry says, I go in and boom, I hit a long one, pandemonium. The crowd's going crazy. Boom, I hit another one. I'm hitting baskets. I'm rebounding. I'm making passes. I'm blocking shots. And then I make the 2 winning foul shots at the end of the game. And I win the game. And the next day, the paper says, Larry Bird saves the day. And he says, that changed my life. Well, I was real excited, Neil, about finding all the newspaper articles on that. So I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked. And I looked some more. And it just wasn't quite there. But it was. I found 2 box scores. One of them said Larry made 1 out of 9, and the other one said he made 2 out of 9 that night. But they both reported the winning foul shots. The kicker here was a narrative I did find in the paper that wasn't online. I had to really go deep to find this one, where a guy was there who he said, and the surprise of the night was sophomore Larry Bird, a sub who came in and scored 2 quick baskets underneath, kind of changed the momentum of the game, and they scored the 2 winning shots. And then the headline that I found didn't say Larry Bird saved the day. It said Steve Land, who scored 27 points that night. Larry scored 6. Land and Bird propel Springs Valley. Now, did Larry fib? I knew he didn't, because I ran into the same thing when I wrote my memoir. I started making notes, and then I started looking through the old newspapers, and my golly, I was wrong half the time. And sometimes I did better than I thought, and sometimes I did worse. We just don't remember the way it was exactly. But what we do come away with, and this I absolutely believe this did change Larry's life, because how he saw it. He saw his name in the paper for the first time, and he wanted that. He saw he could be that. And Larry said from then on, he dedicated his life. He still had a lot of things to do and learn, but that's when he was paying complete attention at that point. That really turned him on. And I think it did. I think a lot of young boys have that moment from some experience where it changes their life and puts them on that path.
Can I ask you? You talked about someone like Steve Land that is the star. How come someone like Steve Land? How come it's Larry Bird becomes the guy from Indiana that makes the NBA and becomes one of the greatest players of all time, and not Steve Land or anybody else before him? Why is Larry? What happens, for Larry, for that to happen?
Well, there is one piece of magic in this story. This is my simplest explanation, and it's right on, I think. So Larry was 6'3" his junior year. When he got to Indiana State, he was 6'9". He grew 6 inches, and he kept all his guard skills. He was a 6'9" guard in the 1970s. And Steve Land was and I talked to Steve. I don't talk to him daily, but I talk to him usually once a week. And we've talked about this, but he said, Randy, I was a tweener. I was in between being too big or too little. He was about 6'5" and weighed probably about 215. He's just a big guy, still is. And so he had a chance to go to Hanover. I'm talking about Steve now. He had a chance to go to Pitt, several schools, but his dad wanted him to go to medical school. Larry talks about this in his book. And Bobby Knight allows him to come to and try out. So he tries out, and finally Bobby Knight calls him and he says, you need to go become a doctor. And so that was that. And his dad said, you got to go to IU. So that's how Steve Land ended up going to IU. But But it also answers your question about Larry, that there were a lot of people that were 6'5", 6'6", maybe even 6'7", that were pretty good, but none of them got to be 6'9" and still have all those skills. And Larry worked harder, I think, than anybody else. That's what Larry lived for. I'm working on how Larry got to Indiana State, and that's an interesting story that's been also not told completely right. But somebody said, I came across a newspaper article, and somebody was saying, when it was announced he was going to Indiana State, they said, well, he's been out of the action for about a year and a half. He's not going to be any good. And the coach's response was, no, he's been playing all the time. So I got to looking through the newspapers. Indiana back in those days had AAU ball, they had independent leagues, they had all these big tournaments through the summer with maybe 48 teams. They were famous. They brought even ex-NBA players, and Larry played in all that. I think Larry was playing every weekend. He was probably in better shape than any of the guys coming in when he got to Indiana State. So Larry wanted it. He was hungry, and he did everything he could to get there.
Was there an attempt to talk to Larry for this book?
Yes. We'll see how much of this goes on. So I ran to what I call the Larry Bird Mafia, and they just, some of them wouldn't talk, and later some of them thawed and did talk to me. But a lot of them have stayed close to Larry and the people that I want to talk to. Now, Jim Jones talked to me several times. Gary Holland talked to me several times. I've become close friends with a lot of those people and the people that played with Larry. But so I gave a book to a fellow, a Patera Holt, about 2 weeks ago. His family, his father kind of took Larry under his wing when Larry came to Indiana State, and this guy that I gave it to runs the dad's business now. But he was about 14 at the time, and he and Larry got very close, and they worked together. They mowed yards together, dad, Larry jobs and things like that. So I said, would you give this? I couldn't get this book to Larry. Larry's got this public, a person that kind of runs his business, who is a wall, and Larry's probably not going to hear anything you're trying to tell him or ask him about. She's very, very specific about shutting those kinds of things down. So this guy, I said, do you think Larry will get it? Do you think Larry will read it? And he said, I don't know. And he said, and he may get mad too. Because he said, I've seen that. I've seen him get mad and say, well, what you talking to that guy if you're going to talk to me? So what we're talking about there, Neil, is controlling the narrative.
Right.
I've run into that as a historian when I did military history. So you're writing about this battle, and you're writing about these common everyday soldiers who do not like officers typically because they're sending them up the hill to get killed. And then you interview the officers, and suddenly you're getting different stories.
Yes. And
the officers are telling stories that exonerate them from anything bad happening, and but they want to control that narrative, and then they'll get mad and they won't talk to you. So you get that. You get that anytime you get a historical figure. I could get it with Abraham Lincoln. When I would do historical stuff, regional history stuff, if I try to do some kind of research and writing on somebody where there'd been a lot of writing about, I ran into that people that would try to stop my stuff from getting published in journals because it disagreed with their stuff, and they had stick too. Because if you wanted a job later on, you might want to contact these guys for. It was funny finding that world, discovering that world, because I'm just a country boy, and but it's there, and you learn. What I ended up doing is always writing something nobody's worked much on, so that way I don't run into that narrative thing.
Right.
Larry was a change of pace, but I didn't know that I was going to find all this stuff about all the people that helped Larry, which is what the book ended up being more about than Larry himself.
Right.
Basketball in Indiana.
Right. So there, I assume going in, you knew that you weren't going to be able to get Larry to
yeah, I knew that.
Now, because this podcast is focused on, sports books, the authors and the athletes, I should ask you, you talked about Larry's biography. I think it's called Drive, correct?
Yes.
So tell me about some of the some of the texts that you leaned on, some books and sources about Larry. Obviously, you went out, you went into old newspaper articles, and I believe there's a writer named, and it's slipping my mind right now. Burge, is that the last name?
Yeah, Jerry Burge was these. The sports writers were gifts. The 60s and 70s were the ages of these big papers, even in small towns.
Yeah.
6 pages of sports and detail. These people went to these games. But Jerry Burge was from Jasper, Indiana, which was the big town close to Larry's town. It was a very wealthy town, still is. Our present governor's from there. A German-American community there, in very prosperous, hardworking, historically community. When the French Lick people would go play them, which they were the poorest county, going over to one of the richest, they'd say, well, we're going to go play in air conditioning. They'd go play basketball games. So there was more animosity from the French Lick people toward those people than the other way around. But Jerry, anyway, was a reporter there at the Jasper paper. And he's the one that started telling people in Larry's senior year about, hey, this guy's really good. You just can't believe what he's doing. And then he backed it up with information. What I really love about those sports writers, and Jerry Burge was, I dedicated my book to him. He was perhaps the best. They would write narrative that captured the specific turning points of the game. Most of them were very insightful about that, and Jerry was one of the best. One of the most iconic basketball games that Larry played in high school was against Lagodi, where I went to school. I saw that big game against Jasper. Mm-hmm. And it was a turning point because Larry's, Jim Jones had quit. Larry was a senior. People thought they might win half their games that year. Coach thought they might do a little better. They were 2-2 when they came up against Jasper, and Jasper was rated in the state that year, and they had a 6'8" guy named Mike Liegers, who was one of Larry's big competitors, and there were other. Jeff Bobble played guard. He's on the picture of him trying to block Larry in basketball in the regional games. Anyway, Jerry wrote about that game, or he wrote about the Jasper game first, and that was a big upset. French Lick won, Larry's team won, and that was a turning point for the team. They went on a long winning streak of 11 games till they came up against Lagodi. So Lagodi was in their conference. It was for the conference championship, the regular season, and Jerry Burge was there. That gym holds 2,800 people. There were probably 4,000 there. I was one of them, and we were stacked in there. Bobby Knight was there. There were 6 college coaches. In fact, that's the game where Bobby Knight talked to Larry after the game. And Bobby Knight, Larry wanted to go to Indiana State even then, and Bobby Knight said to him in the coach's office, I just heard this the other day, that Bobby Knight says, where else are you thinking about going? And Larry said, well, maybe Indiana State. And Bobby Knight said, if you're thinking about going to Indiana State, I don't want to talk to you. Mm. And that pricked Larry a little bit in the way that Bob Knight wanted to prick him, and he made changed Larry's mind, I think, that night. In that game, Jerry Burge caught 2 things that other people did not catch. One of them was, and this basketball game is told in almost all of Larry's biographies because it was the one Larry said he always wished he'd had back. But all those narratives will claim that Larry scored a basket on the wrong end for Lagodi, and that was the point differential in the game. That's not true. And when I read that, I thought, that's not true. He walked. And Jerry Burge said the same thing. He said it was called off. I don't know why it got told wrong, but it got told wrong. And then I probably got told wrong because it's a little more, there's a hook there, isn't it? Gee, scored for the other team, and that was the difference. But the other thing that he caught that was more important, Jerry Burge did, is he said the third quarter, Larry was knocked out for about 4 or 5 seconds. And they had to call a timeout. And Lagodi won that game because one of the Larry's fellow players almost got tied up, and he called a timeout to stop the clock, and they were out of timeouts So Lagodi got the 2 foul shots and got the ball back, and that's how they won the game.
So sources like Jerry Burge obviously dedicated the book to, as you say, having a reporter in each town and having them, it's not something that really you'd see as much anymore, right? I mean, with that's gone. So that it's interesting to see what you relied on to kind of help you tell the story, because there wasn't a lot of, how else would anyone know, right? If there was no Jerry Burge, it'd only be word of mouth, right? We'd have a lot.
For him, especially there. In fact, people just not too far away outside of Larry Bird's playing area did not know about Larry. The only article that appeared in the Indianapolis papers, there was only one, and it mentioned Larry along with all the other tall guys like Mike Liegers and Kurt Gilstrap and Dave Smith and Tim Eubanks. There was going to be 4 or 5, 6, 8 guys in that sectional that year, and Larry got mentioned as somebody that might be able to play in college. And what's interesting about that story is that the day after that article came out, Bob Knight went down to see Larry play the first time. So he had read that article, and that's how he saw Larry play. And he saw that Larry was special. He said Larry had the best hands of anybody he'd ever seen.
Describe to me being in this gym now, so many years later, so many important people and key people in the basketball world there. Go back in time and kind of describe this atmosphere with you describe people as drugstore coaches and barbershop experts, and it's for the people that haven't read this book. This is not just your high school students packing the gym. It's a community.
Oh yes.
So describe this to me. Take me to that gym.
So we got to back up a little bit. There's even a bigger thing here, and that is the rivalry between Lagodi and Springs Valley. These rivalries. Every county, if there were 2 schools, 3 schools in a county, they hated each other. There would be vandalism. This was for keeps. These games were big deals, bragging rights, betting. So Lagodi, historically during that time, had a lot of famous teams. They had probably the best. He ended up being the winningest coach in the state, Jack Butcher at Lagodi. And his son was a junior that year. And they were undefeated when they played Springs Valley. So that gives you a sense of how torqued up all that was. Meanwhile, and I was at Lagodi, so normally I would have gone back to Jasper where I was living at the time. I was about 20 miles from Lagodi, and I would have changed my clothes, and then I would have gone on to French Lick to the ball game. But the junior high coach there who I was going to go with, he said, get in the car. We got to get to French Lick. And I said, why? We're early. And he said, we won't get seats the way it is. He knew that place was going to be packed. So when we got there, we got shoehorned into some seats even before any of the games started. And there were still people coming in. So, and I've got pictures, one picture in the book of the floor of that, where you can see they're 3-4 deep onto the floor. And when the players would come by, they would kind of try to pull back away so the players could get through. But I will say this. If everybody was at that game that said they were, there wouldn't have been any room on the floor to have played, because everybody wants to claim they were at that iconic game. So that, and it was hot. It was the last day of January. No, it was the 29th of January. It's funny I would remember that date. And it was probably 80 degrees that day, just a real hot day for that time of year. So that gym everybody was just sopping wet and hot. And then the junior high game or the junior varsity game, Springs Valley won on the last second shot. And Kevin Mills hit that shot. He passed away recently. He's gotten inducted in their Hall of Fame here this year, along with Steve Land, by the way. But anyway, that really got the Springs Valley guys excited. So that's a game that Larry blamed Beezer Carnes for kind of screwing up, calling that timeout. But he did say, we'll get him back in the regional, because if Springs Valley won their regional and Lagodi won their regional, they would meet in the sectionals, they would meet in the regional. That's the way that was set up. And they would have if Lagodi hadn't won their first game or lost their first game there at the regional. So that's where they were going to get their revenge. And that was a big deal. I mean, that all of that is iconic. And I should also add that the year before, Lagodi had beat Springs Valley at Lagodi in the last second shot. And that picture of that's on the back of my book, where Larry's got his arm up, kind of swinging it. I always thought he was celebrating, but one of the Lagodi guys, when he saw me put that on my Facebook, he said, no, Larry's mad. A guy just scored the winning basket, and Danny King's coming over there, his teammate, saying, I'm sorry. He got away from me. So that was a tremendous rivalry during those days.
Can you take me to this, like, again, let's go back to the idea of, like, I think a lot of people would think, hey, like, Larry Bird's playing high school basketball, it's going to be students that are attending. But tell me about these drugstore coaches, these barbershop experts. These are grown men come to these games, like these high school basketball games, and it means a lot to them, right? They're chasing coaches out of town, right?
Yes. Well, they're. Let's look at the dark side of Indiana basketball, and we could look at French Lick and West Baden. Two towns. I don't know if you've ever been down there where those big resorts are. There's two big resorts there now. Mm-hmm. And beautiful. They've got a casino down there. Mm. But anyway, a great rivalry. But those towns would be run by people with money, and there was always feuding in these towns, and a lot of betting. And so. These grown-ups were very involved, and there would be things I ran into of why guys got to play and why they didn't. And somebody had made this really good player, his dad had made somebody mad, and they had a way to get at him by, going to the coach, and they had something on the coach. So there was a lot of stuff like that going on besides just controlling the game. In the first So Springs Valley and West Baden consolidated in 1957-58 and went all the way to the state finals, and they were our state tournament for Final Four, and were undefeated in the regular season. And in the first game that they played, one of the locals counterfeited tickets and told everybody to get there early, and when the opposing team got there wasn't any place to sit. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of thing the grown-ups were doing. I think Springs or French Lick went through 4 coaches in 4 years.
Right.
During the time that the one guy was let go that went to Milan and won the state tournament. So yeah, these were movers and shakers, and there was money in town. There were bankers that were involved, and wherever the money was, and they were on school boards, and they thought they were better coaches than the coach. And, the only way to keep ahead of all that was to win. A quick story on Jim Jones. So Jim's first year, and remember, it's my claim that if Larry hadn't had Jim Jones as coach, Larry would not have gotten where he got. So in Jim's first year, he was 5-12. But you're going to get a pass on that first year. The next year he came in the sectionals, he was 6-12. And I found a newspaper, Evansville newspaper, that said Jones is gone. But Jones won a double overtime against a team a smaller team that probably went deep in the tournament, that he caught the magic ring, and he had a deep run into the state tournament, and he kept his job. So I gave a talk about a year ago to this community that lost that double overtime. Mm. And my preface was, isn't that great that Jim won that game so we could have Larry Bird to talk about? Mm-hmm. And I got cussed out of that room because, as they said, damn it, we wanted to win that game. We didn't give a hoot about Jim Jones. Right. But it just tells you about the energy in towns, and not just the big shots, but that anybody could go into those drugstores and have a theory about that. That happened in Southern Illinois. I used to go with my dad. He worked there in town. We lived out in the country, and I used to go to the coffee shop with him, and there'd be all these people in there, referees, coaches, state policemen. all sorts of people having these same kinds of arguments and betting going on and those kinds of things. So, basketball, there's nothing like it in Indiana.
Well,
River State.
There is in the first section of the book, there is this quote about not quote, it's the line of the book about being the beating heart of a past era. So I'm wondering, for those of us, like, obviously Hoosiers was made, there had to be, for Hollywood to make a movie about this place, there had to be something going on there that was unique and worth the story. So I'm wondering when that kind of, if you can give me a timeline of like when it started and
I would say in the 1920s, when we started getting better transportation, a lot of people went to these things. I mean, there were 15,000 people in Indianapolis, which, by the way, is in the center of the state. It's not a super big state, so it's accessible. Where they played held 15,000 people. They had 16 teams there. There were regions and districts and sectionals and so forth feeding into this. So you had all this building up during this time. But I would say probably in the 1920s, and remember, the 1920s was the big jump in professional everything in America. Baseball, football, basketball, but especially baseball and football, but even in Indiana, basketball. So people had money. They had better transportation, starting to get better transportation, relatively speaking, and radio. So if you couldn't get to the state tournament play, they would have radio, special radio set up, and telephones where people would fill the gyms. Somebody would be on the phone and they would be doing a play-by-play to all the people in the community. But the heart of all this is the community. These teams became them.
Right.
And basketball is so visceral. It's you're right there on the floor. You're there. You're there. Pass the ball. Stop. Shoot. Don't foul them. You're there, standing up, talking to them. I don't know of another sport where you can get that close to them and be in kind of a synergy kind of thing with people. And I remember when I played, just backing up a little bit because it's along the same lines. So I grew up in a rural area that was agricultural. My mom had married my dad, so we lived with my dad's people. Very rural, farming. My mother's people were more intellectual, had done some college, and mom was going to become a doctor and went to college, had a scholarship, and after World War II, women couldn't do that anymore, so she ended up marrying my dad. But so we're in this area, and I can drive a tractor, but you probably wouldn't want me to. So I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing, and I sure as hell couldn't fix one. And so I was kind of the thing I would hear people say is, "You're not like your dad's people, are you?" And that wasn't a compliment.
Right.
And somewhere along the line, I got good at basketball. I didn't expect to get good at basketball. It wasn't something that was in my family. It just, a number of things came together and broke my way where I was playing varsity by my sophomore year. So I went to a little school of 100 kids, single class basketball in Illinois. We won one game my sophomore year, and I had a ball because I was playing. I was getting stuff in the paper and so forth. The next year, we were 21. We won 21 games. The next year, we had the longest winning streak in the state. That record still stands at my school. So now all of a sudden, people are coming up to me, these old farmers. I don't know if they're going to basketball games or not, but they're reading the paper and they're saying, "Wow, we're proud of you. You're really doing good." Mm-hmm. But you would see them there, and so there was that. I got to ride that lightning bolt myself with that community. Now, I ended up having some depression problems during that time, which is what my book ended up being about, but and my father's relationship and so forth. But it fits into what Larry was getting to. I think it was some of that was Midwest, but yes, it was communal. Yeah, it was absolutely communal. It was the initiation of young boys into manhood. It was egalitarian. It was underdog. But the funny thing about Indiana is, for all the love of the underdogs, they like precision, what they call like a machine basketball. So sometimes you were tempted to go with the big schools that, nobody could beat, and they were like unstoppable. So it varies, they would kind of jump on different bandwagons over the years.
When did you think it ended, or has it ended? I mean, it started in the 20s. This, do you feel?
I would say the height was probably, I think the highest attendance was in 65, but it stayed high all through the 50s and 60s. But the highest, I think, was 65. And as long as they had class basketball and the schools weren't consolidated, that's your golden age. What happened was communities died. Walmarts, interstates, what we're doing now over the internet.
Yeah.
These communities are just, there's nothing there. And then all the work moved away, with the middle class work and the factories and those kinds of things. So that was a part of that dying. But I would think the thing that really killed Indiana was going to class basketball, which I had mixed feelings about. I understand it, and I'm a fan of it, and I'm not at the same time. So
tell me, for those that don't know, including myself, tell me what class basketball is.
Single class basketball is little schools, big schools, everybody plays. I went to a small school of about 100 kids, and we were so small in Illinois, and there were many, many more teams than in Indiana, more population in Illinois. Us small schools had to play our own district tournament before we could play the big boys. So we went through that. But there was Milan was a famous Indiana school that made Hoosiers. Hebron in 52 was a famous Illinois district school that won the state tournament. And there was another one from Southern Illinois in the 60s called Cobden. But catching the golden ring, that's that story. It's always out there. Maybe this will be the year for that kind of thing. So what the schools did in a lot of states is they made classes. In Illinois, they had two, big school, little school. And then that wasn't fair enough because you had all these little schools. So then I think they have 4 classes now, maybe 5 in Illinois and 4 in Indiana, class basketball. So there's A, which is the smallest school. I'm not sure.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I could say, that's what I was saying. I just thought I'd get clarity on that. Well,
you could see how that would kind of kill the chance of a little school knocking off the big school.
Right.
But what you have here is, of course, academies and things, which are small schools, but they can basically recruit. So that's kind of messed that up some.
Yeah. I was going to say, Larry Bird now would not probably be playing for his high school basketball team, right? Larry Bird would be identified early and go to a academy, right? That's how it would work now.
And a lot of them go to state. We got a local kid here that went down to Florida to an academy, and he's come back. He's playing at IU now.
Right.
Indiana University.
So it's kind of like, in a sense, when you're talking about a past era, we're talking about this kind of communal competition where the community supports the team. There's a team in every kind of area, and that's not really going to exist in that same way anymore because the best of the best are in any state.
And the communities are gone too. The little coffee shops and things where they met. Old high schools that have been consolidated. All those good teams, their pictures were up on the wall. People, for years, you could go in and hear people talking about all these names. I heard them from my dad. And so my sense of basketball history in Illinois goes back to the 1940s. Right. And the names and the coaches, and we'd watch the state tournament, and eat popcorn, and then there would be more legends being made.
So you think the end of that era is it can't I pinpoint an exact time. It's more of the things that factored into the era ending, which are many things as you're talking about, the communities, the academies, the internet. So over time, I guess, but starting in the 1920s.
Yes.
I want to close out by asking you about Larry's ties to the state right now. How is Larry viewed in Indiana? Is he back there often? What's the kind of connection between Larry Bird and Indiana?
Well, he coached the Pacers.
Yes.
And was general manager there and so forth. So I think he still comes up to Indianapolis some. I understand he has a home in Brown County, which is near the Bloomington area. And he was coming into French Lick often, but he hasn't done that for a while. He wanted the casino. He bid for the casino there. And he and Trump were bidding for the casino, and Trump got it, and then Trump didn't. And then another guy, Cook, that was a doctor, was a billionaire, came in and really did a good job with bringing back town. But I think Larry was kind of upset about not getting the casino. But his mother died. He would come back and see his mother, and she's gone. And I don't think any of his family lives there anymore. I think they live in Terre Haute, three of the brothers maybe. And so he's not a presence there. He comes back to Terre Haute, Indiana State. He came back for the museum. My wife and I were there to see him speak. And of course, there were thousands of people there, but I don't think he comes back there very often either. Of course, he's getting older, and so he lives in Naples, Florida, I believe. He does signings. Somebody was telling me he does a lot of personal signings, but he's a very intern, private person, and he can't hide. He's 6'9", 6'10", and he's so you've got that going on. And you were talking about how he's remembered here. This is the heartbeat of Larry's story. And I go and I could walk in a restaurant with my books and probably sell a dozen. Just walking in and say, who wants a Larry Bird book about his high school days? I mean, he's revered. But kids, the present generation and one after, whatever they're called now, do not know Larry the way the rest of us know Larry. My generation and my generation's kids know of Larry.
Right.
Because they remember at Boston, they heard us talk about him and so forth. But the people running the country now, the younger people, I was doing a book signing at Springs Valley at the gym there, where they got Larry's shirt and his picture up, where he played high school. The gym's still there. And I remember I was in the corner, and these young people came by, and I had his picture up there, and they said, who's he?
Oh,
so
wow.
Even the people in Springs Valley, the kids don't know who he is because they're doing other stuff. They're whatever young people do. They're not linking much. It's just sports.
How are the book sales so far?
They've been very good, great. I've hit this area. I can probably sell books here. If I did it every day, I could do it a lot sooner. But I try to do 2 book signings a month now, and do very well. I got out to the Boston area. I got on the Boston Celtic blog I was having trouble getting on the East Coast to the West Coast, so I was complaining about this at a book signing in Paoli, and the guy says, hey, one of my students, and this guy he'd gone to Springs Valley, but he taught at Milan. He said, one of my students works at the Boston Celtic blog thing, so I ended up being interviewed by them in Boston and got some sales there. But they too are not as interested in Larry, and that era is lost to them because that was a different kind of a basketball style and so forth. I'm having trouble getting on the West Coast. I don't know if Larry's just remembered there very well. So the Midwest, I would say, and Celtic fans, there's still places that I can probably go and reach out and peddle the book. But
what's next for you or what are you working on right now in terms of authorship?
I've always usually got about 3 projects going, but as far as Larry Bird, I started working on an article about how Larry got to Indiana State. That's the last chapter of my book, by the way. Well, but I wanted to fill that in a little bit more, and I found a lot of new stuff. that I didn't know. And that's been interesting because you get that projection there about Larry. Larry was getting there all that time. He wasn't there yet. And then I started looking at so he had a redshirt season, his freshman season. He wasn't able to play, but he could be there in the gym. And then he started playing his sophomore year. So I started looking at that sophomore year, and I ran into the same thing. Larry says in his book Drive, he talks about the place being packed. They built the big Holman Center, about 11,000 seating here in the 70s, and then they couldn't fill it. They were getting 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people. And but even when Larry played, I went back and looked. I got a hold of a guy whose dad took all the pictures for Indiana State.
Right. And
we're thinking about doing a picture book. But I was looking at some of the pictures he played his sophomore year, and that place isn't full. It's half full.
Right.
So, he's not remembering it right. He's remembering it as exciting, I guess. And it finally got that way toward the end of the season. But anyway, I'm working on that, and maybe I think his senior year has been done pretty well, but maybe those 2 years for people who want to know more about Larry Bird. So we'll see.
I think it's what I found interesting in your book. As I said, I'd never read. I obviously watched Larry play. On TV. I was, that's my era of watching basketball. But I never read a book on him. And I didn't know that he only spent a month at Indiana University Bloomington campus before.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's also at the tail end of your book.
The first game when he came home, the first time he came home, he went to Oakland City to see Mark play. And that's when his mother said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I quit IU," and she wouldn't talk to him for 6 months. So there was that. So yeah, I will probably revisit that. I did do 2 articles in a sports magazine about his time at Northwood, the little community or the 2-year school there and so forth. That's an interesting time. And I think the big takeaway there is how much he was playing on weekends at these big tournaments against some so he was getting better just doing that.
Well, I want to thank you for your time today, Randy. Hopefully we've exposed your book to a new audience here in Canada and wherever else they listen to SportsLit. And you can always, we'll make sure to put the link to buy up on our social media so people can buy your book.
Very good. So yeah, I'll look forward to seeing if I get an audience going up there. And we were talking about the Blue Jays, but I was cheering for him. So
yeah, you were actually referring to someone from Illinois named Don Mattingly that you
Evansville, Indiana.
Indiana, sorry, my fault. Yes, so there's the connections abound.
Yes, so fun stuff.
Thank you.